5 years had passed since the destruction of the Vareth fleet, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Commander Seong Haniel stood on the observation deck of New Incheon Colony and watched cargo shuttles descend through the atmosphere, carrying supplies for the refugee processing center that had been built on the outskirts of the settlement. New Incheon sat on the edge of what had once been Dominion space and now served as humanity's primary point of contact. With the species that had freed themselves from Vareth control, the Dominion had not fallen to human weapons. It had fallen to its own victims. The message of the Vareth fleet's destruction had spread across the galaxy like wildfire and conquered. Species that had accepted their fate for generations suddenly remembered that resistance was possible. The Morith had been first to rise, and their rebellion had inspired the Verdani, who had inspired the Kelari, who had inspired dozens of others. Within 2 years, the Dominion's outer territories had collapsed into chaos. Within 4 years, the Vareth homeworld itself had been surrounded by a coalition of former slave species, demanding unconditional surrender. The Vareth had surrendered, and now millions of refugees from the former Dominion were seeking new homes across the galaxy. Some of them had come to human space. Commander Seong, said her aide, Lieutenant Beek Minjin. The latest transport has landed and the refugees are being processed through standard security protocols. Any issues? Haniel asked. Nothing significant, Minjun replied, although several of the refugees have requested to speak with a human official directly, and they say they have questions that the processing system cannot answer. Haniel nodded and made her way down to the processing center. The Persis facility was clean and efficient, designed to handle thousands of refugees per day, while maintaining the security protocols that human doctrine demanded. All refugees were scanned for weapons and recording devices. All refugees were interviewed by trained personnel. All refugees were kept in the processing zone until clearance was confirmed. It was not cruelty but caution, because humanity had learned that trust must be earned, and never assumed. Haniel entered the interview room where a small group of refugees waited. They were Vareth young ones, by the look of them probably born after the Dominion began its collapse. Their leader stepped forward, and Haniel was surprised to see that it was barely an adult with the soft features of someone who had never known war. Commander Seong, the young Vareth said, my name is Keva Sarin, and I have brought my family here seeking asylum. Your asylum request is being processed, Haniel replied. Is there a problem with the procedure? No, Keva said quickly. The procedure has been fair and thorough, but I have a question that has troubled me since we first decided to come here. Ask it. Kerath hesitated and then spoke with obvious difficulty. Why are you helping us? Haniel raised an eyebrow. You are refugees fleeing violence and instability, she said. Helping refugees is a basic principle of civilized behavior. But we are Vareth. Keveth protested. Our people tried to invade your space, and our fleet was destroyed, and we have been your enemies for 5 years. So why would you help us now? Haniel studied the young alien for a long moment. May I ask you a question in return? Keveth nodded. Did you personally order the invasion of human space? No, Keveth said. I was a child when that happened. Did you fire weapons at human ships? No. Did you participate in any military action against humanity? No, I have never been a soldier. Haniel spread her hands. Then why would I consider you my enemy? Keveth stared at her with an expression of complete confusion. Because we are Vareth, he repeated as if the answer should be obvious. You are refugees, Haniel corrected. Gently, you came to our border with no weapons and no hostile intent, and you asked for help, so you are not enemies, but guests. She sat down across from him. Let me explain something about humanity that your people never understood. She said, we do not hate the Vareth, and we never hated the Vareth, because hatred requires emotional investment, and we have no emotional investment in species that leave us alone. Kavoth listened intently. The fleet we destroyed 5 years ago was not destroyed. Because we hated its crew, Haniel continued. It was destroyed because those ships crossed our border with weapons armed, and that action triggered an automatic response that has nothing to do with hatred or revenge. But the response was so extreme. Kevin said, "Total destruction with no survivors and no mercy." "Mercy is for individuals," Haniel replied. "When a refugee comes to our border, we show mercy because they are an individual seeking help. But when a warship crosses our border, it is not an individual, it is a threat, and threats are eliminated." She leaned forward. "The doctrine exists precisely so that we can show mercy to people like you, because if we did not have absolute defenses, we would have to treat every Vareth as a potential enemy. But because our borders are secure, we can afford to judge each person by their own actions, instead of the actions of their species." Kevith was silent for a long moment. "My grandfather was a general in the Dominion fleet," he said. "Finally, he died believing that humans were monsters who killed without reason." "And what do you believe?" Haniel asked. "I believe that my grandfather was wrong," Kevith said slowly. "I believe that humans are not monsters but something else entirely. And I do not have a word for what that something is." "We are survivors," Haniel said simply. "We survive being prey by becoming too dangerous to hunt, but we have no desire to become predators ourselves, so we exist in a space between those two things, and we guard our borders with fire while offering open hands to those who come in peace." She stood and extended her hand to Kevath. "Your asylum request will be approved," she said. "You and your family will be given housing and education, and the opportunity to build new lives in human space. But you will be expected to follow our laws and respect our customs and never threaten the safety of our citizens." Kevith took her hand. "We will," he promised. "My family wants only peace. Then, you will find it here." Later that evening, Haniel stood on the observation deck again and watched the stars emerge as the sun set behind the mountains. Lieutenant Beak joined her with 2 cups of tea. "The final count for today is 4,000. Refugees processed," he reported. "All cleared for settlement in the outer districts." "Good," Haniel said. "Commander, may I ask you something?" "Of course." Minjin hesitated. "Do you ever wonder if the doctrine makes us as bad as the species we defend against?" Haniel considered the question carefully. "I used to wonder that," she admitted. "When I was young and idealistic, I thought there must be a better way to protect ourselves, and I thought absolute response was too extreme." "What changed your mind?" "History," Haniel replied. "I studied the early colonies that were destroyed by raiders and slavers, and I read the accounts of survivors who watched their families die because humanity was too gentle to make potential enemies afraid." She turned to face him. "The doctrine is not about cruelty, Lieutenant, and it is not about punishment because it is about prevention. So we make the cost of attacking us absolute, so that no one ever attacks us, and because no one attacks us, we never have to kill anyone." She gestured toward the refugee processing center. "And because we never have to kill anyone, we can afford to show mercy to those who come in peace. So, the doctrine is not a contradiction of our values, but a foundation that makes our values possible." Minju nodded slowly. "I think I understand," he said. "Good," Haniel replied, "because someday you may have to explain it to someone else, and when that day comes, I want you to remember why we built these walls." She looked up at the stars. "We built them so that the people inside could live without fear, and we built them so that we could offer refuge to the desperate and welcome to the peaceful, and we built them so that humanity would never again be prey." She smiled. "The galaxy has learned a simple truth, Lieutenant, and that truth is that humans do not conquer and do not expand and do not enslave because we simply exist behind our borders of fire, and the wise leave us in peace while the desperate find shelter within our walls. Above them the stars burn cold and eternal, And somewhere out in the darkness, new beacon networks were being installed along the expanded borders of human space. Each beacon carried the same message it had carried for centuries. A warning to the hostile, a welcome to the peaceful, and a promise to both. Human space accepts no trespassers, especially those who expect to return. Ambassador Park Jin-ho adjusted his formal uniform and stepped through the airlock onto Galactic Concord Station with the measured calm of a man walking into a room full of predators. The station served as neutral ground for diplomatic negotiations between the major powers of the galaxy, and today it was crowded with representatives from over 60 species. All of them had come to see the humans. All of them had questions. Jin-ho could feel their eyes on him as he walked through the main corridor. Toward the assembly chamber, some of those gazes held fear, and others held curiosity, and a few held something that might have been hope. Ambassador Park called a familiar voice. Jin-ho turned to see Counselor Jivith Alaran of the Morath approaching. With two aides following close behind Counselor Jivith, he replied with a polite nod. "I did not expect to see you here today. The Dominion brought me to their council chamber to explain your people to them," Jivith said with obvious amusement. "And now I find myself invited to the Concord as an expert on human affairs. So it seems my role in the galaxy has changed dramatically in the past few weeks." "And what did you tell the Dominion about us?" Jin-ho asked. "The truth," Jivith replied, which frightened them far more than any lie could have managed. They walked together toward the assembly chamber. "I should warn you," Jivith said quietly. "The other species are divided in their opinions about humanity, so some see you as liberators who prove the Dominion can be defied, while others see you as monsters no different from the Vareth themselves." "And which do you believe?" Jin-ho asked. Jivith considered the question carefully before answering. "I believe you are something new," she said finally. "A species that has chosen to be neither predator nor prey, and the galaxy does not know what to make of such a thing." The assembly chamber was already full when they arrived. Representatives from dozens of species sat and tiered rows surrounding a central platform where speakers addressed the gathering. Jin-ho took his place on the platform and felt the weight of galactic attention pressing down on him. "Ambassador Park of the Human Collective," announced the Concord moderator. "You may address the assembly." Jin-ho activated his translation device and began speaking. "Distinguished representatives, I come before you today not to apologize for the destruction of the Vareth fleet and not to threaten further violence, but to explain the principles that guide human interaction with other species." He paused to let the translators catch up. "Humanity does not seek conquest because we have no interest in ruling other species, and we do not seek expansion because our current territory provides everything our civilization needs, so we ask only one thing from the galaxy, and that thing is to be left alone." A ripple of murmurs passed through the assembly. The being left alone requires the potential aggressors understand the cost of disturbing us, Jin-ho continued. "And so we have built defenses designed to ensure that any attack on human space results in total loss for the attacker, with no exceptions and no negotiations." "And what of mercy?" called out Ambassador Trevik Shan of the Kalari Confederation. "What of the principles of proportional response that civilized species are expected to observe?" "Proportional response failed us," Jin-ho replied calmly. "In our early years we responded proportionally to raiders and slavers, and they interpreted our restraint as weakness, so they kept attacking and kept killing our people until we changed our approach." He looked directly at the Kalari ambassador. "The doctrine is not about punishment, and it is not about revenge because it is about prevention. So we make the cost of attacking us so absolute that no rational actor would ever consider it worthwhile." "But the Vareth were not attacking your civilians," protested Ambassador Vorik Sethan of the Veshan Empire. "They were conducting reconnaissance, and you destroyed them without warning." "They received 3 warnings," Jin-ho corrected. Each warning clearly stated the consequences of continued intrusion. and they chose to ignore all. 3. So the responsibility for their fate lies with them and not with us. The assembly erupted in arguments as various species debated the ethics of human doctrine. Jinho waited patiently for the moderator to restore order when silence returned. A new voice spoke up. It belonged to Delegate Marth Kessev of the Verdani, a species that had been conquered by the Dominion 3 generations ago. Ambassador Park, Morith said slowly, my people have lived under Varath occupation for 120 years, and we have dreamed of freedom every single day, but we lack the strength to fight back. The chamber went quiet. Your victory over the Varath fleet has sparked hope among the conquered species of this galaxy, Morith continued. And many of us are asking a question that I will now ask openly. He leaned forward in his seat. If we helped you destroy the Dominion entirely, would you then turn on us? The question hung in the air like a blade. Jinho felt the eyes of 60 species watching him and understood that his answer would shape galactic politics for generations. The human collective will not help you destroy the Dominion, he said clearly, because we have no interest in fighting wars beyond our borders. Disappointment flickered across Morith's face. However, Jinho continued, we will also not prevent you from fighting for your own freedom, and we will not assist the Dominion in suppressing rebellions among conquered species. He spread his hands. In a gesture of openness, what you do with your own fate is your choice, and humanity will neither help nor hinder you. But I will say this clearly, so there is no misunderstanding. His voice hardened. If any species that achieves freedom then decides to test human borders, they will discover that our defenses do not distinguish between former oppressors and former victims. So freedom from the Dominion does not grant permission to threaten us. Morith nodded slowly. You are saying that you want no part in galactic affairs, he said. I am saying that we want to be left alone, Jinho confirmed. Help us achieve that goal or ignore us entirely, but never test our borders because the consequences are not negotiable. The assembly dissolved into smaller discussions as species grouped together to debate what they had heard. Counselor Jivith found Jinho standing alone near the exit. That was masterfully done, she said. You gave the conquered species hope without promising them anything. And you warned potential aggressors without making direct threats. I simply told the truth. Jinho replied, humanity has no interest in galactic domination, but we have even less interest in becoming victims again. The Dominion will fall, Jivith predicted, not because of human intervention, but because your victory proved they can be defied. And that knowledge will spread through the conquered worlds like fire through dry grass. Perhaps, Jinho acknowledged, but that is not our concern. Jivith studied him for a long moment. Your people are strange, Ambassador, she said finally. You have the power to reshape the galaxy, and yet you want nothing but your own little corner of space. We learned long ago that empires require constant maintenance, Jinho explained. They require soldiers to fight, and administrators to govern and police to suppress, and eventually the cost of maintaining an empire exceeds the benefits of having one. He smiled slightly. Humanity chose a different path, and we built walls instead of armies. And we made the cost of breaching those walls so high that no one would ever try. So now we can focus on building our civilization instead of defending it. And if the walls ever fail, Jivith asked Jinho's smile faded. Then we will build them stronger and higher and more terrible than before, he said, because humanity will never be prey again. And anyone who forgets that lesson will be reminded of it in ways they will not survive. Jivith nodded. Slowly, I believe you, she said. And for the first time in 200 years, she felt something she had thought lost forever: hope for a galaxy where the strong did not automatically devour the weak. Hope that perhaps humanity's strange philosophy might spread to other species. Hope that the future might be different from the past. On the Varath homeworld of Keth Prime, the High Council of the Dominion gathered in emergency session for the first time in 300 years. Supreme Commander Vareth Keshine stood before the assembled lords and generals with a datapad clutched. In his trembling hands, he had ruled the Dominion for 40 years and had never known a moment of true fear until today. 12 warships, he said into the heavy silence. 12 of our finest vessels crewed by 18,000 warriors and officers. Vanished in less than 15 minutes. The council chamber erupted in angry shouts and demands for immediate retaliation. Vareth let them rage for several minutes before raising his hand for silence. I share your fury, he continued. But fury is useless without information, and we have no information because the humans left us nothing. He activated the main display and showed the council what little data they had recovered. Fragments of sensor logs, corrupted beyond usefulness and partial. Communication recordings that contain nothing but static and screaming. The final transmission from Admiral Veshkari had been deliberately scrambled by human jamming systems. We do not know what weapons destroyed our fleet, Vareth explained. We do not know how many human ships participated in the engagement, and we do not even know the exact location where our fleet was. Destroyed because the humans have erased all navigational data from the debris field. Then we send 100 fleets, shouted General Krevik Morin from his seat near the back. We send 1,000 fleets until we overwhelm their defenses through pure numbers. And how many of those fleets will return? Vareth asked quietly. The question hung in the air like poison. Gas. The humans sent us a message after the destruction of our fleet. Vareth continued. They said we should send another fleet because they have room, so I ask you all to consider what that message means. He paused to let his words sink in. It means the humans want us to send more ships because they are confident they can destroy anything we send, and it means their defenses are not stretched thin by the loss of our fleet, but remain fully operational and waiting. Impossible, muttered Lord Thesik Varan. No species could build defenses capable of stopping the full might of the Dominion. 3 days ago, I would have agreed with you, Vareth replied. But 3 days ago, I believed humans were primitive cowards hiding behind empty threads so clearly my assumptions were wrong. He turned off the display and faced the council directly. We have dominated this galaxy for 1,000 years because we understood a simple truth, and that truth is that conquest requires acceptable losses, so we absorb the cost of resistance and continue forward until victory is achieved. The council members nodded because this was the foundation of Dominion strategy. But the humans have created a situation where the losses are not acceptable. Vareth continued, every ship we send into their space is a ship we lose completely with no survivors and no intelligence gained, so the cost of attacking them is infinite while the benefit remains zero. Then, what do you propose? Asked Admiral Theska Morvain. That we simply accept this humiliation and do nothing. I propose that we learn from our enemies before we make the same mistake again, Vor said. And to do that, we need allies who understand humans better than we do. He pressed a control on his datapad, and the chamber doors opened to reveal a delegation of aliens that made the council members hiss with surprise and disgust. They were Morith, a species the Dominion had conquered and enslaved 200 years ago. Their homeworld had been stripped of resources and their population reduced to servants and laborers. The idea that Vareth would bring them into the sacred council chamber was an insult beyond measure. The 4 you protest, Vareth said calmly, understand that the Morith have been monitoring human space for decades, and they have information we desperately need. The lead Morith delegate stepped forward. Her name was Councillor Jivith Eloran, and she moved with a dignity that seemed impossible for a member of a conquered species. Supreme Commander, she said with a voice that carried no fear. My people have watched the humans since they first emerged into the galaxy, and we have learned things about them that the Dominion never bothered to discover. Then speak. Vareth commanded. Jivith looked around the council chamber at the beings who had murdered millions of her people and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The humans call their defensive philosophy the doctrine, she began. And it was born from trauma so deep that it shaped their entire civilization. She activated her own datapad and showed images from human history. In their early years of expansion, humans were attacked repeatedly by raiders and slavers who saw them as easy targets, and those attacks killed millions of human colonists, including entire families and communities. The images showed destroyed colonies and mass graves. The humans responded first with diplomacy and then with measured military force, but neither approach worked because their enemies saw restraint as weakness, so the humans stopped being restrained. She changed the display to show a map of human space ringed with red markers. They built the doctrine on a simple principle. And that principle is absolute consequence, so any unauthorized military vessel that enters human space triggers an automated response designed to achieve total destruction with no survivors and no usable intelligence. But why? Demanded General Krevek. Why such extreme measures when conventional defense would suffice? Because conventional defense can be overcome through attrition, Jiveth explained. The humans made a decision that the cost of attacking them must be absolute and unchangeable, so that no enemy would ever calculate that victory was worth the price. She turned to face the council directly. Your fleet was not defeated by human warriors or human ships, but by automated systems that required no courage and felt no mercy. So the humans did not have to choose to kill your soldiers, because that choice was made centuries ago when the doctrine was created. The council chamber had gone completely silent. The humans do not want your territory, Jiveth continued. They do not want your resources or your submission, and they simply want to be left alone. So the only way to survive contact with humanity is to never initiate contact at all. Supreme Commander. Vorath absorbed this information with growing unease. You speak as if you admire them, he said. I speak as someone who has studied them carefully, Jiveth replied, and I tell you truthfully that the humans are not your enemy unless you make them your enemy, so the choice is entirely yours. She paused and let a small smile cross her face. But I should mention one additional detail that my people have observed. What detail? Vorath asked. The conquered species of this galaxy have been watching the Dominion for centuries and waiting for any sign that your power is not absolute, Jiveth said. And now they have seen 12 of your finest warships erased from existence by a species you dismissed as primitive. Her smile widened. I wonder how long the Dominion's control will last once the galaxy realizes that you are not invincible after all. Vorath felt the cold hand of fear grip his hearts. He understood now why the humans had sent their message on all frequencies. They had not just announced their victory to the Dominion. They had announced it to every conquered species in the galaxy. The humans had not started a war with the Varith Dominion. They had started a revolution, and the Dominion might not survive it. Defense Coordinator Yuna Siong sat in the command center beneath the mountains of Geneva and watched the tactical display with the same calm expression she had worn for 30 years of military service. The display showed 12 Varith warships, surrounded by a web of red lines that represented targeting solutions from over 40,000 weapons platforms. The enemy fleet had no idea how badly they had miscalculated. Coordinator Siong said her aide Captain Ren Daewon. The response council is assembled and awaiting your orders. Yuna nodded and turned to face the holographic images of the 12 council members who governed humanity's collective defense. They represented every major faction of human space from the Earth Coalition to the Frontier Alliance to the corporate territories. Under normal circumstances, these groups could barely agree on trade tariffs. But defense was different. Defense was the one thing that united humanity without debate. Council members. Yuna began. At approximately 1400 hours standard time, a Varith Dominion fleet of 12 warships crossed the red line and ignored all 3 warning protocols, so I am requesting formal authorization to execute the doctrine There was no discussion. No arguments or political maneuvering. One by one, the council members pressed their authorization codes into the system, and the display confirmed unanimous approval in less than 30 seconds. Authorization confirmed, announced the automated system. The doctrine is now active for Engagement Zone 7. Yuna turned back to the tactical display and felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. The doctrine had not been created lightly. It had been born from tragedy and watered with the blood of millions of human colonists who had died in the early years of expansion. 3 colonies lost to raiders who saw humans as easy prey. 2 more lost to slavers who thought humanity would make excellent servants. The governments of that era had responded with diplomacy and measured force, and both had failed. The aliens had seen human restraint as weakness and human mercy as invitation. So humanity had changed, not into conquerors because humans had no interest in ruling other species. Instead, they had become something far more terrifying. They had become a species that simply could not be touched. Open a channel to the Varth flagship, Yuna ordered. The communication officer nodded and established the connection. Fleet Admiral Tyan Vishkari, Yuna said into the microphone. I am Defense Coordinator Yuna, Seong of the Human Defense Collective, and I am required by law to inform you that your fleet has triggered an automated response that cannot be recalled. So you have approximately 4 minutes before engagement begins. The response came quickly, and Yuna could hear the barely controlled panic beneath the alien admiral's words. This is Admiral Veshkari, and I demand to negotiate terms of withdrawal. Because the Vareth Dominion does not seek war with humanity. Your demands are irrelevant, Yuna replied. You were warned 3 times, and you chose to ignore those warnings, so negotiation is no longer possible. You cannot simply destroy a Dominion fleet without consequences, Veshkari shouted. The Dominion will send 100 fleets to avenge us. The Dominion is welcome to try, Yuna said. We have room. She cut the communication. Meanwhile, aboard the Eternal Conquest, Admiral Veshkari watched his tactical display descend into chaos. The human weapons platforms were not attacking in waves or formations. They were attacking from everywhere at once. Drones smaller than escape pods swarmed around his warships and attached themselves to hull plates before detonating with focused plasma charges. Larger platforms fired kinetic rounds at velocities that should have been impossible, and each impact punched through Vareth armor like it was made of paper. His ships returned fire, but they could not target enemies they could not see. The humans had filled this region of space with sensor jamming fields that made accurate targeting nearly impossible. Navigation, Veshkari screamed. Plot a hyperspace jump and get us out of here. I cannot, Keth Morani replied with a voice that had gone hollow. The hyperspace lanes are blocked, and I am reading gravity mines at every exit point. Veshkari felt his world crumbling around him. The humans had planned for everything. They had known exactly how the Vareth would respond to entrapment, and they had sealed every possible escape route before the first shot was fired. Communications, he tried desperately. Send a message to Dominion Command and tell them what happened here. I have been trying, Yen Tavalik said, but something is blocking all outgoing signals, and I cannot even confirm if any of our transmissions are reaching beyond this system. Of course, Veshkari thought bitterly. The humans would not allow survivors. And they would not allow information to escape, either. This was not a battle. This was an execution designed to leave the Dominion with nothing but questions and fear. On the bridge of the destroyer Immortal Fury, Captain Sevek Holland watched his ship die around him. Hull breaches spread across every deck, and the engineering section had gone silent minutes ago. He had ordered evacuation, but the escape pods that launched were immediately targeted by human drones. The humans were not accepting surrender. They were not taking prisoners. They were simply erasing the Vareth fleet from existence with the cold efficiency of a surgeon removing diseased tissue. Why? Alan whispered to no one. We would have accepted terms, and we would have withdrawn. But even as he spoke the words, he understood the answer. The humans did not care what the Varath would have done after being caught. They cared about what the Varath had done by coming here in the first place. This was punishment. This was a message written in fire and death intended for anyone else who might consider testing human borders. The last thing Captain Alan saw before his ship exploded was a single human drone hovering outside his bridge viewport. Its sensors scanned him for exactly 2 seconds. Then it fired. Back in Geneva, Coordinator Seong watched the final Varath ship vanish from the display. The engagement had lasted 11 minutes. Cleanup protocols are active, reported her tactical officer. All debris is being collected for analysis, and all biological material is being incinerated, so nothing useful will remain for the Dominion to find. Yuna nodded slowly. Prepare a message for Dominion space, she said. Standard format and standard content. The communications officer typed quickly and then read the message aloud for confirmation. To the Varath Dominion High Command from the Human Defense Collective regarding the 12 vessels that entered human space today and will warn 3 times before engaging automated defense systems, resulting in total loss with no survivors and no recoverable intelligence. The Human Defense Collective offers the following response to any planned retaliation, and that response is send another fleet because we have room. Yuna approved the message with a single gesture. Transmitted on all frequencies, she ordered, make sure everyone in this galaxy hears it, because that was the purpose of the doctrine, not to win wars, but to prevent them, not to destroy enemies, but to convince potential enemies that attacking humanity was simply not worth the cost. The Varath would receive the message, and they would rage and threaten, but they would also think very carefully before sending another fleet into human space, and that hesitation would save more lives than any treaty or negotiation ever could. Fleet Admiral Tyon Vishkari stood on the command bridge of the Dominion warship Eternal Conquest and watched the stars drift past the observation windows with the casual boredom of a predator who had never known fear. The Varath Dominion had conquered 47 species across 3 galactic arms, and not once in their 1,000-year history had they encountered a civilization capable of genuine resistance. Some species had fought back, of course, but fighting back and winning were very different things. The Varath had perfected the art of overwhelming force, and they applied it with the same cold efficiency that other species might use to swat insects. Today marked the beginning of a new campaign, and Admiral Veshkari felt nothing but mild curiosity about the targets, humans they called themselves. A young species by galactic standards with barely 3 centuries of spacefaring experience and a territory that spanned only a modest collection of star systems near the outer RM. Intelligence reports described them as fragmented and argumentative, with multiple governing bodies that could not agree on anything. They possessed no unified military command, and their technology, while functional, was nothing special. In short, they were perfect targets, the kind of species the Dominion absorbed without breaking stride. Admiral, we are approaching the border zone, announced. Navigation Officer Keth Morani from her station Vishkari nodded slowly and gestured for the main display to activate. The screen flickered to life and showed a region of space, marked by a thin line of automated beacons stretching across the void like a fence made of starlight. The humans call this the Red Line, explained Intelligence Officer Dravik Soren as he pulled up additional data on his console. They broadcast warnings in every known galactic language telling ships to turn back. Warnings. Veshkari repeated the word with amusement curling at the edges of his mandibles. How? Quaint. Should we acknowledge the beacon, sir? Asked Communications Officer Yen Tavalik. Why would we acknowledge prey? Veshkari replied. Continue forward, and log everything for the Dominion archive so future generations can see how easily these humans surrendered their territory. The fleet moved forward. 12 warships of the Vareth Dominion crossed the invisible line that separated human space from the rest of the galaxy, and immediately the nearest beacon activated with a pulse of red light. A voice emerged from the speakers, speaking in the sharp consonants of the Vareth language. Attention, unidentified vessels, you have entered sovereign human territory without authorization, and this is your first warning, so reverse course immediately or face consequences. Veshkari laughed and several of his officers joined him. The idea that these humans thought a recorded message would frighten the most powerful military force in the known galaxy was genuinely amusing. Destroy that beacon, he ordered. I find its voice irritating. A single plasma burst from the lid warship reduced the beacon to scattered atoms, and the fleet continued deeper into human space. For the next several hours, they encountered nothing but empty void. No patrol ships rose to challenge them, and no defensive platforms powered up to block their path. The humans, it seemed, had invested everything in their pathetic warning system and nothing in actual defenses. Veshkari felt a hint of disappointment, because he had hoped for at least a token resistance to make the conquest interesting. Second beacon ahead, Keth Morani reported. This one activated as they approached, and the message was different. Attention Vareth fleet, you have ignored the first warning, and you are now being tracked by human defense systems. So this is your second warning, and it is strongly recommended that you reverse course immediately. Tracked, Dravik Sorm muttered while checking his sensor displays. I am detecting no scanning signals and no active sensor pings from anywhere in this region. Because there is nothing to detect, Veshkari said. These humans are bluffing and hoping we will frighten ourselves with imaginary threats, so destroy this beacon as well. Another plasma burst and another beacon reduced to debris. The fleet pressed onward. They passed through asteroid fields that Dravik identified as unusually dense and navigated around gas clouds that seemed to have formed in peculiar patterns. Veshkari noticed these things but dismissed them as natural phenomena because the alternative explanation seemed too absurd to consider. The third beacon appeared on their sensors 3 hours later, and this time the message contained no warnings at all. Vareth fleet, the voice said with a calm that bordered on mechanical. You have been identified, and you have been logged, and you will not return. Silence followed on the bridge. For the first time since crossing the border, Veshkari felt something cold move through his chest. Not fear exactly, because fear was an emotion the Vareth had bred out of their warrior caste generations ago. Something else, though. Something that whispered to the oldest parts of his brain that perhaps the universe contained dangers he had not yet imagined. Admiral, Yen Tavalik said slowly. That message felt different from the others. It felt like a statement of fact, Dravik Sarn added quietly. Not a threat, but a promise. Veshkari straightened his posture and forced the cold feeling down into the depths where it could not affect his judgment. Superstition, he declared. The humans are playing psychological games because they lack the strength for real warfare, so we will not indulge their theater. He pointed at the beacon on the display. Destroy it. The plasma burst lanced out, and the beacon exploded into fragments that scattered across the void. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Keth Morani made a sound that Veshkari had never heard from a Vareth officer before, a sound of pure disbelief. Admiral, she whispered. The asteroid field behind us. Veshkari turned to look at the rear display and felt the cold feeling return with overwhelming force. The asteroids were moving, not drifting with the random motion of natural space debris, but moving with purpose and coordination. Thousands of objects that had seemed like dead rocks moments ago were now powering up with lights flickering across their surfaces in patterns that could only mean one thing. They were not asteroids. They had never been asteroids. Sensor contact. Dravik Sorn shouted as his console erupted with alerts. I'm reading weapon signatures from the asteroid field, and also from the gas clouds ahead, and also from objects I cannot even identify that are emerging from hidden positions all around us. Veshkari stared at the tactical display as it filled with red markers, hundreds of contacts, then thousands, then tens of thousands. How? He breathed. Our sensors detected nothing. Because they were designed to detect nothing, a new voice said through the communication speakers. It was human, and it spoke with the same calm certainty as the final beacon. Fleet Admiral Tyan. Veshkari of the Verith Dominion, the voice continued. You were warned 3 times, and warnings are a courtesy that humanity extends exactly once, so your fleet has been identified and logged, and you will not return. The cold feeling in Veshkari's chest had become ice spreading through every limb. He understood now what the humans had built here. Not a defensive line, but a trap. A trap centuries in the making, hidden in plain sight, waiting for any fool arrogant enough to ignore the warnings. All ships, he commanded with a voice that no longer carried any confidence. Prepare for combat. But even as he gave the order, he knew it was already too late. The first wave of human attack drones emerged from the asteroid field, and their numbers blotted out the stars themselves.